Hey folks, you're listening to the Idea Roastery. I'm Herman.
And I'm Jason.
So I hear that up there in the north you're having quite the heat wave at the moment, and people have declared war on the air conditioner. Tell me about that.
It's not so much that there's a war. Well, first of all, it is swelteringly hot. Like the last 2 weeks have seen like mid 30s temperatures in London, which is probably unheard of for multiple decades. I don't know exactly when the last heat wave like this was, but it has been quite unbearable. And to be honest, I am missing the aircon sort of luxury that you have in South Africa or anywhere else that's like relatively hot most of the time.
Not that many aircons down in Cape Town because it's fairly mild Mediterranean weather over here, and it does get a bit hot in the middle of summer. But Singapore and the tropics, absolutely.
Yeah. So it's a contentious issue because for two reasons. I think the first one that I've seen in the zeitgeist is it's obviously, aircons have always been seen as like these very negative things, as in they used to, I don't know if they still, like they used to be sort of injected with quite harsh sort of gases. And so for a while, aircons were seen as quite a negative, but now I think it is mostly from an energy point of view that they're seen as sort of energy guzzlers, as opposed to what is recommended, which is to open your windows regularly. And in homes that are like predominantly built with lots of insulation for heat going in, it's causing a lot of problems for people. The other factor I think is more just like the planning permission sort of landscape that the UK has, is that for people who have put up aircons, you do need to get council approval. And there's almost like a jealousy. Whereas if you've got aircon and you've got this big sort of box outside your house, for right or wrong, I mean, sometimes you can put them up and they do, like, there is a certain skyline where there's all these aircons outside your window. But there is also like a planning permission aspect to it too. But I've been thinking about it a lot recently. And I think if the trajectory that we're on in terms of climate is still a thing, is it still a thing? It's still a thing. We do need to start thinking about how we can cater to air conditioning. And for that, we need to almost shed a little bit of this like slowing down of using energy. And we need to figure out better ways to sort of at least support the fact that we're going to have hotter summers in the future.
Yeah, it's a fairly interesting conundrum over there, is that you have global warming, which has been, we're having hotter summers, warmer winters, more extreme weather patterns, etc., etc. And one of the effects of that is that more and more people want to have air conditioning, because it used to just be relegated to like the tropical belt. And now it's spreading further north. I mean, you're pretty far north in London, and you're considering air conditioning, which I think is symptomatic of the problem. And then as more and more people need to cool their homes, there's more emissions and all that. And it's kind of like a feedback loop that perpetuates the cycle. But there's also the fact that it's getting warmer in the tropics. And so you have industrialized nations historically have churned out all this carbon dioxide, and it's being predominantly felt in these lower income nations that weren't really responsible for it in the first place. But now, in order to deal with it, like if you go to Indonesia, southern Vietnam, and places like that, pretty much every single building has one or multiple aircons because it becomes untenable to live there without them. So interestingly enough, though, is that this residential cooling kind of is dwarfed in comparison to the new big energy sink on the market, and that is the data center build out, because they also all need cooling, but the number of data centers are springing up incredibly quickly, and it looks like data center construction is I think it's projected to double by 2030 to 945, 950 terawatt hours. And so overall global electricity consumption is forecasted to grow like just under 4% over the next 4 or 5 years. And so that's a lot. So we're currently trying to deal with the climate crisis, but we also have surging electricity demand in a large part due to data center build out because of the AI race that is currently underway. So that brings us to essentially the topic of this. And over the past, we've been doing this podcast for what, 4 years now, 5 years now?
I think almost 6.
6 years now? Wow. And we've touched on many power generation topics, whether this be solar PV, whether it be fairly niche things like where the nuclear fusion research is sitting, hydropower, wind, geothermal. I think Quay's Energy was the one that we did it on. So over here, we're just going to like revisit a bunch of these and see what they look like in the year of our Lord 2026.
Yeah, there's an overwhelming sort of deluge of different things that are requiring a lot of energy. We also have EVs, which are also being added into the mix. So it's definitely, EVs, data centers. A lot of like industry is also moving away from like sort of smelters that are powered by gas to sort of electrical alternatives. So there is an electrification kind of wave that is still going on, like irregardless of the fact that now we need to add in air conditioning potentially, which I guess is more consumer centric versus data centers, which I guess is more like industrial, businesses that are consuming. But yeah, we can get into it. I think it's definitely on the outset is that we don't have enough energy as it is.
Sort of. So I actually, in doing research for this episode, I was surprised to hear that the primary constraint right now, or the bottleneck, is not actually generation technology. It is now that a lot of large load projects are stuck in connection queues worldwide. So this is essentially that the grid can't keep up with the new generation. And so there's a couple of reasons for this. The main one is that renewables, they've won, right? Like solar PV and wind, they are just so inexpensive now that a photovoltaic plant plus battery storage, so including storage, is now cheaper than pretty much any fossil fuel you can burn. Natural gas still has its place because it is easily transportable and can be ramped up quickly and stuff. But solar PV and offshore, onshore wind, they have kind of won in terms of like cost per megawatt hour. And you have a whole bunch of, there has been a whole bunch of build out over the past couple of years to satisfy this demand because it's also super cheap for someone to start up a solar PV plant. Like I could go and I could buy some property up in the Karoo Desert, layer out a whole bunch of photovoltaics and sell it back to the grid. But the big constraint over there is that you need to get that grid connection. And in order for that to happen, you need a bunch of infrastructure build out. You need to interface with government, of course, or whoever runs the grid.
I think there's something else though, because I think in the UK it's a little bit different, because I think there's a very political aspect to like wind and solar, not just in a national sense, but also like locally, because I think the challenge here is that people see these things as rather unsightly. And in places like
it's a UK problem for everything.
It's a UK problem, yeah.
Whether it be air conditioners.
Exactly. We're dealing with pensioners here. In South Africa, it's quite easy to find like a piece of land where, no one really ever goes and just pop up a bunch of solar panels and no one really interferes. I think the challenge here is that there's definitely like a political bias against these technologies because of, I mean, wind farms are seen as like quite unsightly. Like they like take up landscapes, and people, I guess, don't see it as like a beautiful thing that you're harnessing power from the wind. And solar panels, as I spoke to you before this, there's like planning permission and stuff, which I don't know if is up to scratch with current expectations, i.e., if you've got a very beautiful sort of historic part of London and you just start throwing solar panels up on the roofs and people can see that, it's, not going to fly with local councils. So there's almost like a, not in my backyard kind of sensibility about these different technologies. And that we have actually seen people in the UK and elsewhere starting to think about how do we apportion the price of energy to locals to make it a little bit more incentivized that they don't mind it as much. Whereas I think the UK, until quite recently, had this process where all the costs were kind of like aggregated and it was based on like a specific price point. So irregardless of if you were like really close to a wind farm or not, you would have like a relatively similar price for electricity. But now they're looking at techniques to say, like, if you're close to a solar park or a wind turbine field, you get like a better like reduced rates of energy. So that's hopefully going to like help fix that. But also, we've got Mr. Trump in America, who's also quite anti this, from the point of view that they don't believe that global warming is as bad as people say it is.
Actually, I don't even think that's the point of view anymore, because in terms of pure economics, so forget renewables being clean energy. Think of it more of like wind farm is a good analogy, because you're harvesting a resource that's already there. In the pure economics of it, it beats coal-fired power plants, etc., etc. The difference over here is that there's a whole bunch of entrenched money in the oil, gas, coal industries, and so I believe that what's happening in the US is just protecting those interests to the detriment of power generation, because it is, again, significantly cheaper to go and build out a PV plant that only requires people to go and squeegee it once a week, or have a robot that just automatically Roombas the panels, when compared to the complex supply chains that are required for, say, a coal-fired power plant. You have to carry on mining, carry on bringing the coal through, burning it, cleaning it, and it's a whole complicated operation. So I think that what's happening in the US is fairly interesting, because you would think that somewhere like, California would be, because it's the more progressive of the states, would be the place that like solar panels and power generation is just exploding. But in reality, it's happening in Texas, both because they have a lot of open space in which to put solar panels, and also because there's a lot less bureaucracy around permitting. So you can just go and spin up a solar plant over there. I think the whole thing with the UK and people being like, these are unsightly, it's very well documented. Like, the UK just can't build anything anymore because people are protecting because everything is unsightly. A new train station is unsightly. I've been watching Clarkson's Farm, which is just delightful. And like, every time he tries to do anything, the town council is like, no, you can't do that. Yes, this would improve the economics of the town, but no. And so people in the UK naturally are complaining about the price of electricity, right? But then they're also preventing the construction of what would essentially make electricity cheaper. And now naturally it's not the same person, right? It's not the same person being like, but in aggregate the population is doing that.
The UK has gone, I think, ahead of other nations in that they've got a very sort of strong net zero goal. And this has become contentious because for quite a while we've had these net zero targets and we're supposed to be making good progress towards them, yet the price of electricity is one of the highest in the whole of Europe. And so a lot of people are starting to think, hang on a minute, like, why are we paying so much electricity? And also at the detriment of like the UK has quite a big oil field up in the North Sea, which, Norway is known to have extracted and, created quite a large sovereign wealth fund. And so there's almost like which could be obviously backed by like energy companies. They could be propelling these ideas for sure. But there is this argument of like, okay, we've got North Sea oil, like Norway is quite happy to, extract that and send that to other countries and make money from it. We're trying to go along this line of solar panels and wind turbines that aren't even necessarily manufactured here. I mean, they're mostly imported from China. And yet, when it comes to summer, people are being told like, hey, like, don't switch on your aircon for too long because we want to like make sure that the grid can handle it. And so there's kind of like this animosity towards net zero as like, why are we doing this to ourselves? Why are we paying so much? And I think what's come out the woodwork is that because of the way that prices of energy are pinned, I think they are still pinned to like a gas price in some way. So there is like a lot of inefficiency in the market, which is making me think more recently that I think, similar to South Africa, I think the answer really lies in convincing people to, and giving them the means, obviously for NIMBYs, to actually put solar panels on their roofs and actually just remove themselves from the grid themselves, rather than having this like mentality like that your energy provider is just going to start popping up wind farms and you're just going to see a reduction in your bill. I think it really has to be like, solar panels on the roof, maybe these like vertical wind turbines here and there, but like people actually taking the effort to reduce their usage.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's quickly do one last look at the development of photovoltaics, and then we can go on and look at like where nuclear or geothermal is, as well as a couple of like little battery technologies. So the main thing that's pretty exciting inside of photovoltaics is that, as I said earlier, they're already the cheapest form of electricity generation, and they're actually like these panels are relatively easy to manufacture. The reason that China has a essentially market dominance on manufacturing them is not because they have some secret. It's not like TSMC and complex manufacturing. It's just that they decided to start manufacturing them 15 years ago, and they just got really good at manufacturing them. And anyone else who wants to manufacture photovoltaics has to go through the whole learning process and spin up the plants and establish the supply chains, which is why it's difficult to compete with China right now. However, I'm not sure if you've heard of perovskite silicon tandem photovoltaics.
I hardly know him.
No. So essentially, it is a kind of module that can convert more sunlight in the available area. So the experimental efficiencies have reached about 35.6%. Now, what's interesting about that is that there is a maximum efficiency that you can get per meter of land. And we're actually getting pretty close to the theoretical maximum efficiency that we can get per photovoltaic panel, which is pretty cool, right? So with prices have been dropping. They're unlikely to drop in the same way that they have over the last 2 decades, because I think they became something like 95% cheaper over the last 2 decades. But they're likely to still carry on becoming cheaper. However, we're now starting to get limited by the cost of land and installation, which is impressive. And then, and one other thing with wind farms, there's been a lot of experimentation with floating turbines. So you can essentially construct them in essentially like a shipyard and then float them out to the place and then send some rigging down and pile drive it into the seabed. So it is cheaper to manufacture. So you don't have to actually go and do a construction project out at sea. You just float it out there and then secure it to the ground. So we'll see how all of those play out.
Yeah.
So those are the experimental ones over there.
I like the PV ones because I think I listened to a podcast recently, and I think in Australia, because there was like a bit of thing like a few years ago where Elon Musk had like this thing where he's like he would build a battery plant for Australia. But now, I think more recently, they actually have during the middle of the day free electricity. because they've got so much solar installed, and obviously they've been able to sort of, I guess, reduce their reliance on other things, that you now have this period through the middle of the day where you get free electricity. And what this is doing is it's causing people to like start buying battery technologies and rigging their homes so that during that few hours, however long it is, they're charging up their battery for their car, they're charging up their stuff, they're doing their laundry and stuff. And so over time, that's just going to mean that you're going to have a cheaper bill.
And on top of that is that if you have an open energy market, you can theoretically sell that energy back to the grid at a time when it's expensive. So in both a retail and also a commercial sense. So in a retail sense, you can charge up your Powerwall or whatever when energy is essentially free. And then the late afternoon where everyone comes home and cooks dinner, turns on the TV and has a shower, and the price of electricity spikes, you can theoretically sell that back to the grid. And then on a commercial sense, it's just a larger one. You go and you build a battery warehouse near to the city, and you charge it up when power is cheap and you sell it back to the grid when it's expensive. And in so doing, the market kind of eases out those price fluctuations, and overall everything becomes slightly cheaper.
Yeah. And I think that the sort of economics is like we're seeing the return on investment become better and better. I think for a lot of people though, like when you're evaluating like an energy system, usually the people are thinking in terms of payback periods and like basically the return on investment, right? Like if I pay for like a couple £1,000 system, like how much energy do I need to save to make it worthwhile rather than just paying the bills, which is it's a complicated math because it's at least in the UK, energy prices have been increasing. I think even in South Africa, like they are increasing like more gradually, but so at the current rates it might be good, but I mean it's very hard to kind of predict if energy prices will come down. But I guess with the price of the sort of equipment coming down, it's definitely putting it more into the sort of feasibility point, where even to the point like here, even if you have 3 weeks of really hot summer, even if you had like 1 or 2 solar panels to just power your aircon, maybe that would be enough to push people into that, like maybe I'll go and consider it aspect. Seeing as we're heading a little bit into our time here, I wanted to, data centers is obviously a big issue, but I kind of want to put that aside maybe for a future episode. But I want to talk more about alternatives to solar and wind, those being nuclear, thermo, whatever, like water, dams and stuff. Like, what are your thoughts on these more recently? Because I have a few thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's two, both nuclear and geothermal, I think are like two strong contenders, both of which do roughly the same thing. They have a baseline, or they have a consistent energy output, which is especially something you want, again, for data centers especially, but for that baseline loads that eases out the fluctuations in supply and demand. So with nuclear, what's been interesting is seeing a whole bunch of nuclear projects be revitalized in places around the world, mostly due to price shocks for energy due to all the wars that are that are happening. But also, like, small modular reactors are moving beyond the lab and presentation decks and stuff. I think Canada licensed the construction of a couple hundred that are going to begin life in 2030, and there are a couple of other small modular reactors that are being constructed all over the world.
There's Rolls-Royce.
Oh,
yes,
nice.
Like the UK actually is building their own one. Yeah, although it's it's kind of a controversial because people aren't sure if it will actually be able to be installed because planning permission is crazy. Germany had this thing where they closed down all of their nuclear power stations, and now people are laughing at them because now they have to like import Russian gas or whatever. My point of view has actually changed on nuclear. I mean, unless it's like modular enough that you can install it relatively quickly, because UK there's this Hinkley Point C, which is like supposed to be the newest nuclear power station that the UK has built. it literally, they started thinking about it in the 80s. They started building it around 2000s, and it's not set to be finished until a very long time in the future. And this has basically told me that nuclear is not an option, because it is impossible for, I mean, unless the Western world figures out how to build again, it's going to be very hard to get that online in a time that makes sense for us. I guess you could make the argument that, you know, the amount of energy we're going to require is going to go up as, you know, economically we go up. There's that famous graph of like, there's no like rich nations with like low energy, right? Low energy usage. So there is an argument to say, you know, the things we'll use in the future, maybe we still need to start bringing that online now because we're going to need it in the future. But I like, at the rate that people are able to build stuff here, I do not think it's as viable of an option. Maybe geothermal, because there's not that sort of nuclear runoff risk. And maybe even fusion will get here before some of these nuclear plants become...
I mean, that's highly speculative. So I'm actually tempted, well, I completely agree with you, is that nuclear, while in my personal opinion being one of the most incredible power generation methods that humanity has discovered, is we also are collectively just really scared of it. And so everything requires so much permission and testing and all of that, that makes nuclear one of the most expensive forms of electricity generation. And when compared to like coal and stuff, but if you compare it to photovoltaics and storage, it's like several times more expensive. Not like 20% more expensive, 30% more expensive, and it's like 5 or 6 times more expensive. And so that it would be a struggle to really seriously have that compete. But we are seeing a couple small instances of data centers that are signing contracts with nuclear power stations, or like old nuclear power stations, to come back online or something like that. So we'll see how that all turns out. But I agree with you that we've kind of ruined our ability to build nuclear power stations, except for France. They're doing great.
It's just so remarkable. So like South Africa has like a nuclear power station, and considering how hard it has been for England to put one online, it's kind of a marvel that they even have it, right? Like, you know, and I guess at some point, you know, you'll have to start looking at like the way that Korea does it, because apparently they're quite efficient in doing that. But I like the planning and permissioning stuff, and I don't think it's just in the UK. I think in parts of Europe they're also, you know, relatively against nuclear, except for France. I mean, France is like very pro it, but there is obviously the, you know, meltdown stuff that people do think about immediately. And so it's an interesting one. I think I do want to see more of it, but I think it's just, I don't have the confidence that we're gonna have this nuclear revolution like we maybe should have.
For sure. So let's chat a bit about geothermal and how that's changed over the last few years. So the kind of geothermal that we're really interested in is called enhanced geothermal, and that's where they do horizontal drilling and essentially like create their own reservoirs. So they're not limited to like the permeable rock and surface level superheat. You can drill down really far, drill a horizontal well, and essentially create a closed loop system that circulates water or whatever fluid through it and generates electricity. And so the company that we were talking about back in the day, Fervo, they secured just, I think, like $420 million in financing for a station to be built in Utah.
But they went public, dude.
Did they?
Yeah, you can buy them on the stock market.
Okay, interesting. Well,
yeah.
So the project is approximately 100 megawatts in 2027, and then scale it all the way to 500 megawatts is the plan. And what's interesting about that is that it's not just lab anymore. It's like they're actually doing it. Their test plant worked out fairly well, and so they're building a real power station. And the reason that they can scale it like this is that you drill one well, right? Then when you drill the next well, you've got you can drill it right next to it, and you have the learnings from the first well. So then you drill the third well, and now you've learned from the previous couple of wells, and you're also drilling it in the same site. So you're not really like, you can essentially scale that thing up pretty significantly in a single patch of land, right? And so I think that that's super, super cool. They estimate that they're going to get to $45 per megawatt hour by 2035, which is pretty ambitious. I don't think they'll actually crack it, to be honest. I think that that's asking for too much, but that is roughly in line with the cost of solar power currently. So like, if they can pull that off, that would be awesome. I would love to see that, because it is, like, in my personal opinion, one of the purest forms of energy harvesting. Is like, we've got that energy below us right now, and currently we're not really doing anything with it, and there's also so much of it that you can't really deplete it, and it's just a hole in the ground. You just make a hole in the ground and then you extract energy.
I am quite bullish on this as well, because that sort of footprint is so small that you could just have, like, you know, like a typical power plant like you have today, and you've just drilled super low, like super far into the crust. And I think in terms of like the, you know, backlash that solar and wind get for, like, you know, destroying landscapes, I do think it is going to make a big difference. And it's going to feel a bit like, you know, Nordic Iceland, like, kind of, you know, style energy where, you know, you just got lava and stuff. It does feel quite cool and
but
very
I guarantee
clean.
you is that when anytime it comes to a place near you, there will be a town council meeting, especially if it's in the UK, and they'll be like, "Oh no, think about the earthquakes."
Oh no. Yeah, I was hoping you didn't mention that, but yeah, I mean, there's always gonna be like a pushback, and it's probably from the oil lobby, because they don't like all these alternatives. The future is looking good, but I think we really need to crack on and build more of the stuff that is already available to us, and I think it's the solar and wind that is going to get us through at least the next couple of years. Unless there's a huge breakout in fusion or something like that, which seems rather unlikely. I think these are the things that people need to start investing in. And it's going to, you know, hopefully at least reduce your own footprint of your house. It might not necessarily fix all of the grid problems, which I think is something you should almost bet on. You should bet on the fact that grids are not going to get upgraded at the speed that they once maybe were, and with that in your brain, you're going to figure out that maybe I need to figure out a way to pop some solar panels on my roof and find a way to reduce my own energy requirements. Whether or not it solves climate change is not going to be a given, but at least for your pocket, it's going to make you a lot more better off.
Yeah, to end on like both a positive / negative note over there is that, like, I think climate change it's going to happen. We've already done enough damage that it's not going to happen. Is that we kind of want it to the reason that we try and reduce our impact is to make sure it's not as severe as it could be, because it can, like, the more CO2 we pump into the atmosphere, the worse it gets. And so right now it's not on a baseline. It's going to get worse. But as with any of these things, you know, the exposure is the problem.
The exposure to heat, if people aren't thinking about it now, like even for like a couple of weeks of heat wave, which, you know, it's not unheard of that it will happen again. Like, this should be cemented in people's mind that this is what, even if you're just being super selfish, like, to, you know, make sure that you can run an aircon without having a huge electricity bill, it should be a priority for you, because it's like, studies have shown that, like, high temperatures ruins your sleep, it ruins your focus, like your job is going to be affected, and your just overall sort of mental well-being. Like, having arguments with your partner. Those kind of things come from heat. And unless you can, jet set to somewhere else for a couple of months, well, you're going to have to sort out this problem. And I think it's going to lead to a lot more talk about solar and these other alternatives in the future.
For sure. And I'm personally hoping that geothermal just turns out to have a really good learning curve, and we figure out, hey, listen, for every hole we dig, we earn a whole bunch of money, so a whole bunch of businesses flock into the space, and within the next 10 years we have people just dropping boreholes for energy everywhere in the world. You have an existing coal-fired power plant, and they realize, hey, listen, if we just drop a whole bunch of holes over here, we don't even need to import coal anymore. We just reuse this grid connection and everything, and off we go. So that's my super optimistic hope, right? My realistic one is kind of along the same lines as you. We're going to explore all these other technologies, but we're going to see a massive build out of solar and wind, and I think that's a good thing.
Definitely. Check you next time.
Ciao.